Hello, welcome to Wrestling with Poetry, Kalamazoo, Michigan's premier wrestling and poetry podcast. My name is Ish Klein, and in this episode, I want to talk a little bit about the pioneering wrestler Mildred Burke. Additionally, we have a recording of that great poet, Chicago's own Nathan Hoks. But first, your letters. It reads, Dear Wrestling, great episode on wrestling feuds. It made me think of John Berryman's eulogy for Wallace Stevens. Quote, he lifted up among the actuaries a grandee cow, end quote. Called him a, quote, funny money man, end quote. Sort of a backhanded swipe against his profession, a real Hef Nelson, as it were. I also read that Wallace Stevens once got into a fistfight with Ernest Hemingway in Key West. Are some people just prone to feuds? What do you think? Are there any literary feuds you think resemble the wrestling feuds of yore? Thanks, Ted from Kentucky. Yes, Ted. Some people are prone to feuds. Wallace Stevens and Ernest Hemingway were these sorts of people. Ernest Hemingway had a drinking problem that can lead to feuding, and especially when you combine that with his insecurities. And Wallace Stevens was frustrated and depressed. Are there literary feuds that could make it on pay-per-view? I'll tell you one that I would like to see that, they didn't have so much of a feud, but I read that when James Joyce, all of James Joyce's friends were very keen that he meet Marcel Proust, and then they met, and all they did was talk about their ailments, and then they parted, and they didn't like each other at all. So I think a cool wrestling match would be James Joyce and Marcel Proust wrestling, but they have to be the character of the invalid, each of them, and they have to act out their ailments and try to infect the other one while avoid getting infected by the other one. That could be a pay-per-view. Otherwise, the only ones, I don't really like conflict that isn't fake. You could always go with Gore Vidal and Norman Mailer. I looked up footage of that. It's very uncomfortable. Norman Mailer, yikes. That's a real literary heel. Anyway, thank you, Ted from Kentucky. Your input is invaluable to this show. And speaking of Kentucky, do you know that right now in Louisville, Kentucky, there is a biopic being filmed? And do you know whose life this is based on? That's right, Mildred Burke. Mildred Burke, though perhaps not a household name, was at one time the best-known woman of professional wrestling. Her period of time was 1935 to 1956. That's when she was at her hottest. She is the first widely known moneymaker in the sphere of women's wrestling. She was a world champion for 20 years, and her signature move with which she believed she pinned thousands of people in a way that they couldn't get out of, her big move is the alligator clutch. She beat men, too, in the ring. Over 150 men. She was 5'2", and her range was she started at 115 and kind of got into the 138, 140 area in her prime. From the 30s to the 50s, the newspapers reported on the wrestling matches, and it was the biggest news at that time. Some background. Mildred was from Coffeyville, Kansas. Originally, her name was Mildred Bliss. She was from very humble beginnings and was introduced to professional wrestling when her first husband took her to a match in the Midway Arena that was in Kansas City. And when she saw this match, she just knew that's what she wanted to do. She had to wrestle people. The first husband, this guy who took her to the match, he did not want, he said that is bullshit. You can't do it. I forbid it. But he didn't last. Mildred would sooner get rid of him than let go of this new dream. Because she was serious about this passion of hers, and he was not supportive, she divorced him. I believe I already said that. Divorced and pregnant. Mildred was working for her mother at this cafe in Kansas, and who walks in but Billy Wolf, a former wrestler himself turned wrestling promoter. He stopped by the cafe because around the block he had a gym, and he was talking Mildred up. She was working there. The year was 1934. Side note, Billy Wolf is a villain and a compulsive womanizer. But Mildred knew who he was as a powerful wrestling figure, and she just was pestering him to teach me how to wrestle the real way, etc. He told her to come by the ring around the corner and he'd try her out. So unbeknownst to her, he gave a fella money and told the guy, just destroy her so she'll give up this idea. He did not know that she had a lot of pent-up rage. That's right, because even though the guy was paid, they underestimated her. She was extraordinary, and Wolf had never seen a talent as good as hers. So he did the natural thing that a guy interested in money and wrestling would do. He took her on his card and changed her last name from Bliss to Burke, because it made, in his mind, she seemed more formidable with the last name Burke. And they got married. They went on the road of the carnival circuit together. Billy Wolf would offer anybody $25 if they could beat her, and they never did. They had to be within 20 pounds of her weight, just to keep it, reasonable. Her instinct was correct. She loved wrestling, and she was the Women's World Cup champion from 1936 to either 1952 or 56, depending on how you look at it, because these things, sometimes something will be called in the ring, but then it'll be invalidated. There's a lot of contention. She was also well known because she was kind of a bodybuilder and had a lot of pictures taken of her showing her biceps and things like that. And reputedly, they had her picture on the Los Angeles Police Department wall to coax the other police officers to get into shape, saying, if you go to seed, the women will rise up with their muscles and destroy you. I don't know exactly why they put that up, but I'm guessing, anyway. She was a media darling for a while, but after her divorce from Wolf, which was very contentious. I'm telling you, all the relationship stuff is a nightmare. It's a nightmare and a drama. And I'm sure that's going to be in the biopic. Matter of fact, they could probably make a long series out of all of the bullshit that guy did and these crazy, crazy ups and downs. I don't want to give it too much of this precious airtime. But Wolf was a jerk. He was a jerk. I got Sisters of the Squared Circle, The History of Women's Wrestling by Pat LaPrade and Dan Murphy. That's where I'm getting a lot of this information. Here's a success to me. She found something that she loved, and she became good at it, and she did the hell out of it. Also, she trained other wrestlers and is credited with making American pro wrestling popular in Japan. So, thank you, Mildred Bliss Burke. Let's celebrate with a poem by Nathan Hoks. Nathan Hoks has published 3 books of poems, most recently Nests in Air in 2021 from Black Ocean Press. He has also published translations of poetry by Vicente Huidobro, Christian D'Autremont, and Henri Michaud. He teaches at the University of Chicago and at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and lives in the city with his family.
Beans for dinner. When they ask me, do you want beans for dinner? The answer obviously is yes and no. The rain smells of old lemons, dryer sheets, and the moon, and in a reflection on the dark window, a kid's rosy cheek and her rain boots. So, yes or no, do you want beans for dinner? Well, what we should ask is there money in the holster? When you rub a feather on the field, is it because you want beans for dinner, or because you have entered the snowstorm of indifference? The ice on your ear is the mark of the poem's delirium, so of course you're not hungry. No beans, no dinner, only the wind, only the sandcastle, only the waves carrying us back into the lake.
Great job, Nathan. Where can you read in Kalamazoo if you are a poet? and want to share new work? Well, you can read at Satellite Records on Thursday at 5:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. That's located at 808 Southwest Nedge Avenue in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I'm not seeing any other poetry events here in Kalamazoo, but if you know of any that you want to share, just email me at wrestlingwithpoetry@gmail.com. Or if you have a question, go ahead and ask it, wrestlingwithpoetry@gmail.com. And what's happening in wrestling this week? War at the Shore will happen on July 1st. That is Independence Pro Wrestling, and the venue is a Battleship, and it will be at 560 Mart Street. That is in Muskegon, Michigan. The doors open at 6 p.m. and the event is at 7 p.m. Thank you, Nathan Hoks. Thanks again, Mildred Burke, and thank you, Ted from Kentucky, for your question, and thank you for listening. Have yourself a great time this week. This is Ish Klein signing off until next week.